Hello and welcome to Lesson 1. We are launching into the Sermon on the Mount series. The book is entitled Kingdom Power, the Sermon on the Mount. I can't remember the last time I've actually taught Sunday school lessons on the Sermon on the Mount, so here we go. It's going to be great. Um, I've got allergies today, so be aware. And maybe it won't shut me down, but I'm all stopped up, everything. So we're looking at the Beatitudes, very interesting section today. Matthew 5, 1 through 12. Main idea of the lesson today is Jesus brings life blessings to his followers, even in the difficult seasons of life. Going to be a lesson where we talk about the fact that Christians do have problems. We all do. We go through trials. We have issues. All God's people got issues, okay? Me, you, everybody. But God still blesses us in the midst of those things. He doesn't always rescue us out of them. I pray that He does. I ask Him to do it. But sometimes, like Paul's thorn in the side, He says, "My grace is sufficient, and I'll get you through it." And He does. The study aim: we should seek to experience the true fulfillment in Christ, even in the most difficult challenges. And I'm probably going to say this several times: there's a right and wrong way to suffer. And the Bible has a lot to say about that. I've been teaching on Sunday nights. We're going through the prison epistles, and Paul's in jail in Rome under house arrest, and he has zero freedom, and he doesn't have a clue what's going to happen to him next. But in Philippians, his favorite word is joy. And he's kind of like, God's using it. He's going to be glorified through it. I'm going to be okay. So he doesn't let his circumstances rob him of the joy that he knows the Lord wants him to have. So let's do a quick introduction to the book and to the series. We're in the book of Matthew. Uh, this is a very Jewish, masculine book. Remember, Matthew is one of the 12. He's one of the original disciples. He is Jewish. He's an eyewitness. Not every Mark was an eyewitness, but he wasn't one of the 12. Luke was not an eyewitness, and he wasn't Jewish, and he wasn't an eyewitness. He was none of that. It's interesting that Luke's even in there, but it's a very Jewish book. And when I talk about masculine and feminine, I mean that Matthew is Jewish and they're patriarchal, and they saw the world through a male perspective. Even with the birth of Jesus, we're entering the Christmas season. Matthew gives Joseph's perspective, okay, and his experience. Luke gives Mary's. I'm glad we have it. Luke mentions women more than any other book in gospel. Okay, he mentions women a lot, and so Matthew not so much. So the Sermon on the Mount is one of the 5 discourses in Matthew. Huge teaching sections, letters of words of Jesus in red, huge sections. You don't see that in every gospel. But this is one of the 5 discourses that we see, sermons in Matthew. I yesterday was kind of reading through the first part of the book. It's interesting that to me that there are disciples called before the Sermon on the Mount, but there's others who are called after that. So when Matthew heard Jesus teach and preach the Sermon on the Mount, he was not one of the 12. He was a part of the crowd. Jesus had not called him yet. And so, very interesting. You'll see there in chapter 4, uh, Jesus calls Peter and Andrew and James and John, but over in chapter 9 is where he calls Matthew. You see it in 9:9. And so you see Jesus go into Matthew's house, and Matthew was a tax collector, not very well liked by Jewish society. And, maybe even the other disciples had a problem with Matthew. We don't really know that. We don't see that, but it's mentioned. So, one of the things that you're going to see today in today's lesson, some of these Beatitudes are very easy to understand. I mean, things like blessed are the poor in spirit. Well, that was kind of difficult, but blessed are those who mourn, so that for they shall be comforted. That's pretty easy to understand. There's others that are a little bit more difficult to understand. We'll talk about those as we go through them. I'm going to just go one by one through them. So, again, remember, there's a proper attitude to suffering. You're going to see it in the Beatitudes. You're going to see it in the Sermon on the Mount. I think it's a New Testament thing. One thing to remember, that attitude for a Christian is a huge thing. As a Christian educator, minister of education, we like to measure things, okay? What about Sunday school attendance? We measure that. Is the church doing well? If it's doing well, it normally would grow. So we measure those things. But when you teach the Bible, how do you measure Christian growth? Do you measure it by, do they know how to find books of the Bible when they're called out? Or do they memorize scriptures? I don't think so. I think a person can know a lot in their head and not be a very strong believer. And I think the best measure is attitude. Okay, and so we're going to emphasize that in the lesson. Um, One last thing by introduction, I think inherent in the lesson is the fact that good can and should come from suffering. It should make you better, not bitter. Now, that's easy said. Um, it's easy to say that when you're not sitting in a garbage dump like Job's, scraping your sores with a piece of, some jar, broken jar out there. It's easy to say that when you haven't lost a child or gone through a divorce and things like that. But I do still think that God's will is for us to grow through that experience and draw closer to each other and closer to Him because of that. So that's kind of going to be a truth out there that I may not mention, but, there it is. I divided the text up today into 3 sections. I've got an introduction, which is verses 1 and 2, and then the actual Beatitudes, these little pithy sayings, which is 3 through 11, and then something of a conclusion in verse 12 where he kind of wraps it up. One of the things that you have to think about, he's on the side of this hill and he's just talking to everybody. Is he talking about people who are believers, or is he talking about people in general? I don't know. It's a question. And I say that because as they move forward, you'll see that he becomes more specific. He'll finally say, if you suffer because of me, you're blessed. Um, but that's towards the end of the 9. I think it's interesting that there's 9 Beatitudes. Why isn't there 12 or 7? There's 9 of them. Well, I don't know. Well, let's read the first verse. Here we go. Matthew 5:1. When Jesus saw the crowds, he went up on the mountain, And after he sat down, his disciples came to him. So, on the one hand, he's talking to, is he only talking to those first four? Or is he, there's two different kinds of disciples. There's the 12, and there's disciples. Um, there were lots of disciples. There were women who followed him all the 3.5 years of his ministry. They were disciples. They just weren't part of the 12. I think he's talking to everybody while he's talking to the four that he's already called. There's only four right now, from what I can read in Matthew. So here we go. Let's look at the Beatitudes themselves. He's on the side of a hill, beautiful picture of Jesus standing there, and people are sitting below him, and he's teaching. Here's what he says. He says, "Blessed." First one is, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." Now, this is, to me, is one of those difficult ones. Poor in spirit. What does that mean? They're blessed, and their reward's going to be, theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Now, there's a whole discussion about what the kingdom of heaven is. When you first think of the kingdom, you think about heaven. I think about heaven be a place where you die and to be absent from the bodies to be present with the Lord. That's the kingdom of heaven. No, I think that what he's talking about is anywhere the Spirit of God is at work. And that could be anywhere, okay? If you go and look at the verses where Jesus says the kingdom of heaven is like this, it's not just talking about heaven, the place. He's talking about the kingdom of heaven. It's a whole nother story, a whole nother study out there. I saw one quote yesterday that I thought was good related to the poor in spirit. It says that it's an honest confession that we are sinful and without moral virtue and need the Lord. I thought that was pretty good. It says we confess that we're sinful and we are without moral virtue. Our nature is fallen and we need the Lord. He says if that is your attitude, then the kingdom of heaven will be yours. Good stuff. Second beatitude is, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted." The Lord has a special place in his heart for those who hurt. And he says they will be comforted. They do not go unaware to the Father, and he will meet their need. Terrible thing for people to go through loss. I've got two friends who lost loved ones during Thanksgiving. And every year now, during Thanksgiving, they're going to remember what was happening this year. The Lord said through the Sermon on the Mount is they shall be comforted. I believe the Spirit will comfort them. The next one are, "Blessed are the gentle, for they shall inherit the earth." It's interesting that gentleness is a great attitude. It's a great trait. It's not boisterous. It doesn't look after its own. It looks out for the interest of others. The true attitude of the Spirit is gentleness. The next one are, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied." We don't have a clue about these first century Jews. We just came through Thanksgiving and we were sick of eating. I'm like, Lord, please don't put a piece of turkey or ham in front of me. They probably ate one good meal a day. They never knew what it meant to be satisfied as far as hunger. And so he's playing off of that. He said, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness." These are very poor people who had no free time. All they're doing is working, trying to survive, literally. No free time at all. So that's why it's such a big deal to go to a wedding and have 2 or 3 days of a celebration and not have to work and to be fed. Um, if you hunger and thirst for righteousness, you're going to be satisfied. And that's such a beautiful picture. The next one are blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. What goes around comes around, doesn't it? I jokingly, it's a joke, call it Christian karma. That's it does seem to work out that way. If you are merciful to other people, then mercy will come back to you. If Jesus was nothing, he was merciful. How many times did we see him offer mercy? I mean, it's the whole epitome of grace. It's unmerited favor. It just comes your way, not because you're good. It's just because the person who gives it is good. So if you give mercy, you will receive mercy. Beautiful. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. You see this pure of heart. Now, pure means holy, biblically speaking. The heart is the seat of intellect, the seat of emotions, and seat of the will. And so, if your heart, your intellect, your emotions, how you react to things, and if your will is holy, you will see God. Beautiful, beautiful. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the sons of God. Um, that's a tough thing to be, isn't it? So much turmoil between people going on around us sitting there. And it doesn't seem to get better sometimes. Um, we should still try. We should try to be peacemakers. Jesus specifically said, Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the sons of God. It's part of who we should be as God's children. The next one, blessed are those who have been persecuted for the sake of righteousness. See, he's kind of getting closer to himself here. You see how it's progressing? We know what it means to be persecuted for the sake of righteousness. We have a mental understanding of it. How many of us have been persecuted because we're righteous? Not many of us in this country. Praise the Lord for that. But he says, For theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Again, he has said, You're going to inherit the kingdom. You're going to be people of the kingdom if you've been persecuted for the sake of righteousness. It means you got to be righteous, and it means you've got to show it. People got to see it. It's got to be part of your witness. Yep. Here's the most pointed one. Blessed are you when people insult you and persecute you and say all kinds of evil things against you because of me. See how it's getting closer to Jesus as this thing progresses? You're blessed when people insult you or persecute you. This would come for many of those listening that day, especially the disciples. Well, let's wrap this thing together. Here's the conclusion. It's in verse 12. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward in heaven is great. Now, it doesn't mean there's not going to be reward here, but reward in heaven. There will be some here, but most will be there. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. He said, you're going to be rewarded. It will come. It's nothing new. God's people have always been persecuted. Well, let me give you 4 truths today to kind of put a bow on this lesson today. First thing is your attitude is the most telling as to your spiritual maturity. You could have the 50-year church member plaque on the wall in your house. I was in a church that did that. But your whole, what makes you a mature believer is your attitude. It's the most telling part, the best evidence of your spiritual maturity. Second truth is those who suffer usually are drawing close to the heart of God. That's a time of spiritual growth. Let's try to make up our mind today that the next time we do go through suffering, we'll draw closer to God, and it will be a blessing in disguise. And we'll draw closer to our family and our loved ones, and closer to God, and that all things will work together for good for those who love the Lord. I think you decide that now, that that's how it will go with you. Third truth is believers are not immune to suffering. That's why Jesus mentioned these things. But the Lord is aware of our suffering. It doesn't just happen in a vacuum where He doesn't know. He does know. And He gives us the resources to get through it. Sometimes He doesn't just take it away, but He helps us get through it. Either way, praise be to God. It's still good either way. Good can come from it. Last truth is there's a right and a wrong way to suffer. You know, when we're sick, let's be good patients. When we're suffering, let's be sweet. Um, let's not blame God and blame other people when we hurt. That's not God's will. Let me pray with you. Jesus, we love you. I thank you for these 9 Beatitudes. I pray that we would be all 9 of those things. We would be blessed because of the right attitude that you want us to have. Lord, bless this study. Bless each of your people this week. We love you. We trust you. In your name I pray. Amen. God bless you. You have a good week, and I'll see you next week as we look at lesson 2.